We don't get to see many portrayals of disabled people in media, which is odd considering about 15% of the entire world is disabled. And almost everyone will experience a disability at some point during their life, even if only temporarily. When a disability is shown, it tends to just be used as a plot device, usually serving as some form of obstacle to be overcome or fixed. And to be clear, I'm not saying stories that do this are always bad, but it did make this scene in Hawkeye really stand out.
You rely too much on technology.
Well, my go-to weapon is 2 sticks and string.
No, she means your hearing aid.
Ah.
You might find you're better off without it.
We have Hawkeye, who has become hard of hearing, confronted by Maya, who is deaf. And she is chiding him for relying on technology to fix his disability. So in this video, I want to talk about the importance of disability representation in media and why this scene is so significant. Before we get started, I want to make it clear that I have a limited understanding of the deaf community, so please don't hesitate to correct me if I get something wrong. I'm not an expert by any means, and what I do know is informed from listening to deaf people online, a little bit of research, and my own experience being disabled. For example, I see a lot of similarities between the deaf community and the ideals of neurodiversity.
Just what's coming is hard to say, I don't know.
Before talking about Hawkeye, let's look at some other examples of disability in media, starting with earlier phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Doctor Strange is a surgeon who becomes disabled as a consequence for his actions.
What did they do?
Which then leads him on his quest to get healed. Finding magic that could do so, he only decides not to heal himself, seemingly as a reminder. Here, the disability serves as a plot device. As Strange redeems himself, he is effectively no longer disabled. Another example is Daredevil. When he becomes blind from an accident that spills chemicals onto him, he is also granted super senses. These new abilities go beyond what your average person can do with sight. This kind of story falls in line with the idea of being differently abled, rather than disabled. While the idea behind the phrase differently abled may be well-intentioned as far as trying to celebrate the wide range of human experience, it also is tied to this idea of learning to overcome and or make something of your disability, which we definitely see with Daredevil as well as lots of other media. For example, the autistic genius trope. These types of stories have an implication that disability is okay so long as you can make use of it. Turn your supposed weakness into a strength kind of thing. Unfortunately, this can feed into the idea that if you're unable to do so, then you've somehow let your disability define you or hold you back. As if you're taking on some sort of victim mentality versus recognizing your own limitations due to your disability. I'm not saying don't like these stories, I like a lot of them. My issue isn't really the stories themselves, and more that they're some of the only ones we see. The over-reliance on the same tropes or stereotypes creates or reinforces misconceptions and unhealthy attitudes. We most likely are going to take what's shown in the media as some form of truth. Like, even if we know a topic must be more complicated than what has been shown to us, without actively researching it ourselves, the media is going to affect our thoughts on it. And it's not realistic to research everything that comes up. So, unless we have personal experience with the specific disability portrayed, we aren't going to notice how the media influences us around it. This is part of the reason I want to encourage engaging media with a deeper understanding when it comes to disability, because I know before a few years ago, these are things I would not have considered at all. So now, let's look at some other forms of media which are about deafness. You've probably seen some form of inspirational video in the past titled something like, "Baby hears first sounds," or "Baby hears mother's voice for the first time."
For the first time in 6 months, baby can listen to her mother's voice.
Who doesn't want to be excited for a baby having a positive experience? But the cochlear implant being used here is actually pretty controversial in the deaf community. Yet we never really see that viewpoint earnestly. In this awful episode of House, when deafness is mentioned as a culture, it is immediately shot down with a quip from Foreman.
Anything I can simulate with a $3 pair of earplugs is not a culture.
In Scrubs, we at least get a little bit of empathy for the dad who doesn't want a cochlear implant for his son.
You know what's weird? He doesn't seem like a bad dad. He really loves that kid.
But ultimately, both of these shows or the inspirational baby video imply there is only one correct option. They're basically saying, don't you want baby to be happy? At least I know that was my takeaway when I first saw these. I got to feel self-righteous, feeling I knew the right thing to do, and it was laughable some deaf people would make such an irrational decision. And I had lived around a large deaf community before. So let's actually talk about that other perspective.
And it may smell, but we like that stink.
Let's start by taking a look at cochlear implants. What's not to like about a technology that converts sound to electrical signals for someone's brain? There are two main issues that I could find. First, they are painted as a magic bullet. Take the baby video. It implies you get the surgery and then voila, you can hear. But it's not quite that simple. For starters, cochlear implants don't work for everyone. And many people who receive an implant decide to stop using them, which seems to suggest the device wasn't giving them much benefit. Although some did stop due to side effects like facial twitching, post-surgery scarring, stigma, and pain from the device. Cochlear implants also don't fully replicate hearing. Results can vary quite a bit, and some people hear no improvement at all. If you're living somewhere like the United States, it can be pretty expensive. Without insurance, the average cost can be between $30,000 and $50,000, and sometimes the device stops working, meaning you need a replacement later on. Like any surgery, there are possible complications. For example, some patients develop meningitis, which is an infection of the fluid around the brain. It is extremely rare, but some patients have died from it. For someone born deaf, it takes extensive training to interpret the sounds to understand spoken language. Which brings us to the second issue. Getting an implant and learning to speak is often presented as a strict binary choice in opposition to learning sign language. There's no reason a child couldn't learn both sign language and verbal language if they receive an implant. But there is often a strong push from implant teams and manufacturers to only focus on verbal language. Sometimes even pushing parents to sign contracts promising to avoid teaching sign language to their child at all. This is concerning because if a child is not exposed to enough language while they are younger, they can be at risk for language deprivation. This affects their cognitive skills, mental health, and more. Learning sign language removes that risk and is easier to start with since it won't take as much intensive training as verbal language with implants. Most parents will struggle to find the time to get enough training in and will not have the money to get additional help. And I want to emphasize, I don't think this is the fault of most parents. When you consider that 96% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, we have to understand that they will likely be stressed and completely out of their depth in what to do. So if parents are informed that sign language should be a last resort and verbal language should be pursued at all costs, it's not surprising that's what they would do. This seems like a lot of risk though, based on the assumption that sign language is somehow less, because there is not evidence supporting sign language gets in the way of learning verbal language. All of this is even more complicated when talking about implants for young children who will be unable to give consent. Because it's one thing as an adult to take a risk or modify your body in any way you want, but it's completely different when the decision is being made for you. This is something I found alarming revisiting the medical shows I mentioned earlier. In Scrubs, they go around the dad to get permission from the mom, and there's never any communication with the kid at all, who is clearly old enough to have an opinion on the matter. In House, the child was adamant he wanted to remain deaf, and of course, House ignores that wish. Because, you know, it's funny when a doctor is so smart, TM, to act against the wishes of a patient. Although I suppose that is accurate since the medical industry has a huge issue with not believing patients, especially when it comes to women and black people. The show even shows the mom as being in the wrong for ever supporting her child's wishes to stay deaf, and she overrules him at the end.
I'm your mother. This is my call. I don't know if I'm making the right one, but it's mine to make.
I cannot stress enough how awful this episode is. It goes out of its way to portray pride in being deaf as silly and wrong. Unfortunately, there's a long history of this dismissive and harmful mindset known as oralism. Looking back to 1867, all deaf schools used sign language. However, by 1918, a whopping 80% of deaf students were educated orally instead. This sweeping change was in large part due to sign language being actively demonized by Alexander Graham Bell. You probably remember him as the guy that invented the telephone, even though he actually stole it from this guy, Antonio Meucci, an Italian immigrant who couldn't afford the $10 to renew his one-year impending patent. Bell made it his mission to get rid of sign language, which he referred to as a language that made the deaf less than human on the level of indigenous people, or simply primates. He worried that if deaf people began socializing, they would intermarry and create, in his words, a defective race. See, Bell grew up with a mother who had become deaf later in life, and he admired her ability to blend in with the hearing world. So, he seemed to think every deaf person should be like his mom. This meant pushing all deaf people to blend in by focusing on learning how to lip read and speak, even though pushing oralism left about 9 out of 10 deaf children behind in school. Bell didn't just stop there though. He advocated for eugenics, saying the following at a speech given at the National Deaf Mute College. "I am sure that there is no one among the deaf who desires to have his affliction handed down to his children." I can tell you, it's not great to hear this. As an autistic adult, I've heard similar things in recent years, from people assuming I would not want my kids to be autistic like me. What's really troubling is Bell thought he was helping. He even had a deaf wife that he had 4 children with. See, Bell thought it was okay for deaf people to have children so long as it wasn't hereditary and his wife Mabel didn't become deaf until she was 5 from scarlet fever. So, just in case you were worried, Bell was consistent with his eugenics. Mabel never publicly disagreed with any of her husband's speeches or writings, and she never identified as deaf. She prided herself on being able to blend in like someone that could hear. Yet, when she was nearing death from cancer, she wrote to her daughter, Elsie,
"Having taught you all my life to forget that I was deaf, I now want you to remember it."
It makes me sad to think she lived her whole life trying to live to everyone else's expectations, trying to fit in. And this to me is at the heart of the problem focusing on fixing disability. Bell and others like him never seem to stop and consider whether or not this is what the people with those lived experiences actually want. And we see this with many disabilities like autism or Down syndrome. The focus becomes on eliminating these differences, both through preventing future children from being born, as well as teaching those already here to blend in. But it doesn't have to be this way, which brings us back to Hawkeye. In Hawkeye, we get to meet Maya, a deaf character who is proud of their deaf culture. We see this in how she risks unbinding Clint's hands here because she believes he is also deaf, and she wants to give him access to their shared language. Clint, in return, respects that culture. He doesn't take advantage of this moment.
Yeah, just sorry. Hard of hearing, not deaf.
If you're not familiar with deaf culture, you may just think Clint is talking about his medical condition here, but he's also giving information about his identity, because someone hard of hearing can be deaf, with a capital D, but Clint is not. Deaf, when spelled with a capital D, signifies being of deaf culture, while deaf with a lowercase d means someone who cannot hear. You can even be part of deaf culture if you are fully hearing, like a child of deaf adults. We also see many characters treat Maya like an equal. Most importantly, we are shown her childhood where she is fully accepted by her father. In fact, we explicitly see the importance of both the deaf and hearing world.
You have to learn to jump between the 2 worlds.
The show even handles Clint's hearing loss respectfully and with acceptance. He is supported by Kate Bishop when she helps him navigate this call with his son.
What? Daniel? Nathaniel?
We also see Clint and his family have been learning ASL.
I love you, Dad.
I love you more.
And I'm sure these portrayals were better because both the actors really live with these disabilities. Alakwa Cox, who plays Maya, is deaf. Jeremy Renner, playing Clint, is hard of hearing. Hawkeye is a good step in the right direction that I hope we see more of because our culture, which includes the media we consume, gives us messages that we internalize. Sometimes that can be stereotypes or misconceptions about others that can lead to harm. And other times, the messages can lead to negative thoughts about ourselves. Almost everyone will experience a disability sometime during their life, and many will not recover fully, which is why it's so important to see stories that aren't just about overcoming or fixing disabilities. Not only is acceptance better for others, but it could be crucial for ourselves. And acceptance in no way means denying the difficulties that do exist. In Hawkeye, Maya's father is accepting, but it doesn't change the challenges she faces at school and other aspects of her life.
It's impossible.
Maya feels alone, like an outsider. Clint is clearly still adapting to his hearing changing.
You know I'm going to be there, like I said, right? I'm so happy to hear your voice.
We can feel the frustration and desperation when he is unable to communicate the way he wants, especially to someone he loves. This is important because sometimes there is confusion surrounding identities or pride related to disabilities. People on the outside may assume this is sugarcoating disability, but not at all. Acceptance seeks to empower and allow each individual to decide what they need help with or how they want to change if possible. Acceptance of disability means centering disabled people. Rather than ignore suffering, it takes a more critical look at it. Where is the suffering coming from? If it's societal, then why don't we change that? There's also a good chance a change that helps one group of people will benefit everyone. For example, a ramp doesn't just help someone with a wheelchair. Where I went to school, there was a large deaf community, and it helped my social anxiety to be able to write things down to make a food order, which was a standard around that city. That's actually why we need more stories that question the idea that disability just needs to be fixed. It's good for everyone.
Things look dark, but I know this can't be the end.
There is a lot of pressure in this world to always be productive, and I don't think that's healthy for any of us, but can be extra difficult when we're disabled. No one should have to feel like a failure just because they can't live up to expectations that were designed without them in mind. Learning acceptance rejects this and allows us to still be proud of our identity and ourselves. And honestly, that can be life-saving. I hope this video has helped articulate why focusing on fixing disabilities can be harmful, no matter how well-intentioned it may be. I wouldn't want to not be autistic, and it sucks to hear people talking about autism as if it should be eliminated. Does that mean I don't struggle? Absolutely not. But to follow the logic of disability equals suffering, and since we want less suffering, we should get rid of disability, really is just an argument for removing diversity. Because in our current society, everyone would suffer less if they were just able-bodied white cisgender males that are right-handed and of average height and so on. You get the point. And if you struggle to grasp why some of us would not simply get rid of our disabilities, I suggest looking for communities related to them, because I think you'll often be surprised. That doesn't mean some people wouldn't want to be rid of their disability, but you can't advocate for getting rid of something universally and ignore the impact that has on everyone else. Instead of painting disability as something that must always be fixed, why don't we address the issues that make living disabled difficult? Which means tackling problems like a culture of constant mistrust and worry that someone might get help that isn't needed. We all need help all the time. Why don't we just acknowledge that some people will need more support, and that's okay.
What are your thoughts in the movie that he isn't hard of hearing? Because I think that was a big issue to me, just because I'm such a huge fan of his in the comics, and I thought that it really brought a lot of diversity in the comic world, and to not have that in the movies was a little sad.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and a special thanks to our patrons. If you like this, consider letting YouTube know by clicking that thumbs up, and maybe subscribe and hit that bell if you'd like to see more of our videos. Also, we could use your help. I usually try to include a small shout out at the end of these videos with small creators I think fans of this channel may be interested in, but I could really use some suggestions. So if you know of any awesome small creators, please let us know in the comments. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you're not alone.